Welcome friends to this course on understanding absurdist drama. We are in week 3 and this is going to be our lecture number 1. Today we will discuss Samuel Beckett's play Endgame. Endgame was first performed in Great Britain in French as Fin de Partie on 3rd April 1957 at the Royal Court Theatre, London. Its English translation was done by Beckett himself and it was published in 1958 by Faber and Faber Limited. Endgame is about 4 characters. They are Ham, a wheelchair bound, paralyzed blind man, and his servant who cannot sit, Clove. We also have elderly parents of Ham, Nag and Nell. The setting of Endgame is a sparse, confined room resembling a bunker with 2 high windows showing a barren grey wasteland outside. Inside, the space is minimal. Ham sits in a central chair, paralyzed and blind, while his parents, Nag and Nell, live in 2 dust bins. The setting's claustrophobic, post-apocalyptic feel underscores the play's themes of isolation, dependency and the futility of existence. Theodor Adorno argues that Endgame is set in the post-World War II scenario. It signifies the devastation caused by atomic bombs, as the play informs us that the outside world is all collapsed, indicating that the room where Ham and Clove live, beyond that room there is no world, it is a barren wasteland, there is no life, there is only death. Ham is a blind man, he is paralyzed, he is bound to wheelchair, he cannot walk, he cannot see, and he is dependent on his servant Clove for anything, even for his daily routines. In other words, Ham is totally dependent upon Clove. His name alludes to Ham, actor. It may also be a paronym of Hamlet, a very famous character from one of the Shakespearean plays. Beckett himself has suggested that Ham refers to hammer and of course his servant Clove to nails. Clove as a servant is bound by his duties, although he has simmering resentment. Unlike Ham, who cannot walk, who cannot see, Clove can both walk and see, although he cannot sit. Nag and Nell are legless, physically impaired, parents of Ham, and they live in dustbins. They symbolize dehumanization and fragility caused by old age. Relationship between Ham and Nag is fraught with tensions. Ham calls his father Nag a cursed progenitor, as Ham believes that Nag has committed the sin of giving birth to him, and Ham is suffering because he has been born. Had he not been born, he would not have suffered, and therefore Ham accuses his father of being a sinner. Nell, his mother, often reminiscences about her past, providing us with fleeting moments of warmth in an otherwise dark, bleak play. Endgame is a dramatic meditation upon suffering and its pervasiveness in human life. It begins with Clove saying, finished, it is finished, nearly finished, it must be nearly finished. These words remind us of the last words of Christ before crucifixion, where Christ has said, it is finished. And that, of course, provides us with an opportunity to consider clove as a Christ figure. Clove also says, grain upon grain, one by one, and one day, suddenly there is a heap, a little heap, the impossible heap, I cannot be punished anymore. These words of clove remind us of the pervasiveness of suffering in human life. This suffering is so much in Clove's life that it has become unbearable. He does not want to suffer anymore. Perhaps he has an unconscious desire to leave his master and go away somewhere else, although he cannot, because he reportedly says there is nowhere else to go. Now this idea of pervasiveness of suffering in human life has been suggested by a very famous Western philosopher Schopenhauer, who says, we feel pain but not painlessness, worry but not freedom from worry, fear but not safety and security. We feel the desire as we feel hunger and thirst, but as soon as it has been satisfied, it is like the mouthful of food which has been taken and which ceases to exist for our feelings the moment it is swallowed. We painfully feel the loss of pleasures and enjoyments as soon as they fail to appear, but when pain ceases even after being present for a long time, their absence is not directly felt, but at most they are thought of intentionally by means of reflection. For only pain and lack can be felt positively, therefore they proclaim themselves, well-being on the contrary is merely negative. Schopenhauer is suggesting that pain is a permanent feature of life. Why pain is a permanent feature of life? Why suffering is a permanent feature of life? For that, Schopenhauer has an answer. Schopenhauer says, as long as desires arise in us, suffering is inescapable. So, Schopenhauer is suggesting that human life without suffering is also an impossibility. Not only Clove, but Ham also echoes the views of Schopenhauer. The opening words of Ham are, me to play. Can there be misery loftier than mine? No doubt, formerly, but now, my father, my mother, my dog, I am willing to believe they suffer as much as such creatures can suffer. But does that mean their sufferings equal mine? No doubt, no. All is absolute. The bigger a man is, the fuller he is, and the emptier. So Ham is also indicating that human life is an impossibility without suffering. However, Ham is also suggesting that his suffering is unique, his suffering is exceptional, and compared to the suffering of his legless parents or the suffering of his dog, his suffering is more unbearable. In fact, he gives his suffering a poetic phrase and he rhetorically asks, can there be a suffering loftier than mine? And of course, the answer is no. What Ham is suggesting, that all human beings in their mind imagine that they suffer and their suffering is unique, that their suffering is exceptional, that their sufferings cannot be compared with the suffering of any other human being. Now, if suffering is a permanent feature of life and this suffering is caused by desire, There is another pole that Schopenhauer suggests with regard to human life. Schopenhauer says, the basis of all willing, however, is need, lack and hence pain, and by its very nature and origin it is therefore destined to pain. If on the other hand it lacks object of willing, because it is at once deprived of them again by too easy a satisfaction, a fearful emptiness and boredom comes over it. In other words, its being and its existence become an intolerable burden for it. Hence, his life swings like a pendulum to and fro between pain and boredom. Now, this observation by Schopenhauer is pertinent. It is suggesting that human life is either pain and suffering or it is boredom. Schopenhauer considers boredom as a tame longing without any particular object. And of course, Schopenhauer is suggesting that human life will appear to be worthless if it is marked by boredom and monotony. In the play, Ham reflects this boredom when he says, "It is the end of the day like any other day, isn't it, Clove?" Now, Ham is very clear that each day is similar to, if not the same as, the previous day. There is no remarkable difference between today and tomorrow and yesterday. And because there is no remarkable difference between today, tomorrow and yesterday, it is bound to produce monotony and boredom. Kierkegaard, another very famous existentialist philosopher, has argued that boredom is demonic pantheism. Demonic as it represents emptiness, and pantheism because it pervades everything. And therefore, the challenge before Ham and Clove and Nag and Nell is how to avoid this boredom, how to transcend this boredom, how to overcome this monotony of life. If they are suffering, of course their life is painful. If they are not suffering, they are bored, and that itself is equally painful. Therefore, one has to understand that life is a pendulum which oscillates between desire, pain and suffering on the one hand, and boredom and monotony on the other. Because human life is marked by boredom and suffering, it can often give birth to nihilism. Nihilism can be defined as meaninglessness. It can be defined as the condition of human existence which lacks any profound meaning or value. And of course, this nihilism is a byproduct of both suffering and boredom. In the play, Ham exemplifies this nihilistic attitude when he says, "In my house, one day you will be blind like me. You will be sitting there, a speck in the void, in the dark, forever like me. One day you will say to yourself, I am tired, I will sit down, and you will go and sit down. Then you will say, I am hungry, I will get up and get something to eat. But you won't get up. You will say, I should not have sat down, but since I'll sit on a little longer, then I'll get up and get something to eat. But you won't get up and you won't get anything to eat. You will look at the wall a white and then you will say, I'll close my eyes, perhaps have a little sleep. After that I will feel better, and you will close them, and when you open them again there will be no wall anymore. Infinite emptiness will be around you all the resurrected dead of all the ages would fill in it, and there you will be like a little bit of grit in the middle of the steppe. Yes, one day you will know what it is. You will be like me, except that you won't have anything with you, because you won't have had pity on anyone, and because there won't be anyone left to have pity on. Now, there are some words which are very crucial in this conversation between Ham and Clove. These words are a speck in the void, infinite emptiness, a little bit of grit in the middle of steppe. Speck in the void refers to the nothingness of human existence. What human beings are? According to Ham, human beings are no more than a speck in the void. Their existence, however great they may consider it in their mind, is nothing. It is futile. In fact, a human being is like a grit, like a sandstone, unremarkable, uneventful piece of a little rock which has no deeper, profounder philosophical value. In fact, Ham is indicating that although human beings consider that their lives are meaningful, and of course they try harder and harder to make their lives more meaningful, yet their lives are marked by infinite emptiness. As Ham has already said, the bigger the man is, the fuller he is, but not only he is fuller, he is also emptier. So there is hollowness, there is shunyata, there is a void that characterizes human life on this earth. And this void, when a human being feels, constitutes an unhappy consciousness. This unhappy consciousness has been very well elaborated by a 20th century existentialist philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, who says, "The being of human reality is suffering because it rises in being as perpetually haunted by a totality which it is without being able to be it. Precisely, it could not attain the in itself without losing itself as for itself. Human reality therefore is by nature an unhappy consciousness with no possibility of surpassing its unhappy state." Now, this idea of unhappy consciousness, which is bound to give birth to nihilism, to the absurdist consciousness that life lacks meaning, that life lacks purpose, that life lacks value, is also discussed by Nietzsche in his very famous work, The Birth of Tragedy, where Silenus tells King Midas, "Suffering creature, born for a day, child of accident and toil, why are you forcing me to say what would give you the greatest pleasure not to hear? The very best thing for you is totally unreachable, not to have been born, not to exist, to be nothing. The second best thing for you, however, is this, to die soon." Now, the advice of Silenus to King Midas is crucial. Silenus is saying that the best thing would have been that you would not have been born. You have committed the most serious mistake of being born, and because you are born, you are bound to suffer. So, the greatest pleasure would have been of not being born or to be nothing. However, the second best thing for a human being, Silenus suggests, is death. Now, don't you think so that these worldviews suggested by Sartre and Nietzsche, and of course echoed by Beckett through Ham, are indicative of nihilism? If human life is nothing but suffering, if the end of human life is nothing but death, what should one do? Why should one live? And if one is living, what should one do so that one does not suffer? And if there is no possibility of happiness in human life, why should not one rush towards one's death? Why should one wait for his death like Ham is awaiting his death on his wheelchair? So, these nihilistic questions and philosophical worldviews become very important to understand this play. While Ham is waiting for his death, Ham has to pass his time, and to pass his time he has a companion. That companion is a servant. You already know his name, it is Clove. The relationship between Ham and Clove is dialectical relationship of mutual recognition and negation. Sartre has discussed the conflictual relationship between two individuals, between self and other. Sartre says, while I attempt to free myself from the hold of the other, and the other is trying to free himself from mine, while I seek to enslave the other seeks to enslave me. Conflict is the original meaning of being for others. It is very much evident that Sartre is suggesting that the relationship between two individuals, between self and other, is always conflictual. Self tries to deny the other, self tries to dominate the other, self tries to annihilate the other, self tries to make the other subservient, and so does the other vice versa. In fact, the relationship between Ham and Clove in the play is symptomatic of the relationship of the lord and the bondsman as suggested by Hegel and elaborated by Sartre. If we closely examine the conversation between Ham and Clove, we will find out that Ham as the master is physically dependent on Clove for all his needs, for mobility, for sustenance, for companionship. And of course, Clove resembles the Hegelian slave. For him there is nowhere else to go, and he mirrors the existential entrapment of Hegel's slave. Although there are moments when Clove longs for freedom, his consistent threat to leave Ham suggests an emerging self-awareness, a desire to break from the imposed servitude and assert autonomy. Clove says, "Why do you keep me? There is no one else." Clove says, "There is nowhere else. You are leaving me all the same." Clove says, "I am trying. You don't love me? No. You loved me once. I have made you suffer too much, have not I? It is not that I have not made you suffer too much." Clove says, "Yes." Now, this conversation clearly shows that Ham has no one else whom he can employ as his servant, and Clove has no place where he can go, and therefore they embody Hegelian master-slave dialectic. But there is some difference which can be understood through the philosophical viewpoint of Merleau-Ponty, who says, "The other transforms me into an object and denies me, I transform him into an object and deny him," it is asserted. "In fact, the other's gaze transforms me into an object and mine him. Only if both of us withdraw into the core of our thinking nature, if we both make ourselves into an inhuman gauge, if each of us feels his actions to be not taken up and understood, but observed as if they were an insects." Now, Ponty's observation is critical of Hegelian dialectic of lords and the bondsman. He suggests that apart from the domineering consciousness of the master and slave, there can be other ways of relating to the other, and this other way of relating to the other can also be based on mutual incorporation, where the self and the other will mutually incorporate some aspects of each other. What one has to understand here, that relationship between Ham and Clove in the play is of both love and resentment. Clove has once loved Ham, although Ham has made Clove suffer. Ham might appear to us as the tyrannical master, but we also need to understand that he is totally dependent on Clove, and therefore there are moments when Clove is challenging the authority of Ham and questioning his superiority, thus making Ham vulnerable and totally dependent on himself. Despite Ham has caused immense suffering for Clove, Clove cannot leave. It explores nihilistic philosophy which proposes that life lacks value, life lacks meaning, life is absurd. Other important aspects of this play we would discuss in our next class. So, thank you friends, we will meet in the next class.